Hello, hello. Hey, we got it.
All right.
It's working. Yay!
So, just want to be clear.
Yeah.
Q&A or no?
No. No. I'm going to go for an hour and I'm going to stop. I'm going to go for an hour. I'm not going to go full time.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Sounds good.
Beautiful. Well, welcome. As you can tell, we've had some technical difficulties this morning. There's another meeting over at SoCA. I just discovered that. I didn't know that till just now. And that's where Dan is. I knew that. I know he had a commitment over there. But because of that, we didn't have any tech set up. But we were so grateful for Jason back there. Thank you, Jason. He doesn't know tech either, but he got it done for us, didn't he? So by telephone, so that's nice. As you know, welcome. This is the Dorothy Marie Lowry distinguished guest. I'm the distinguished guest lecturer. It's this series, and we're so happy that you're here. Thank you for coming. This is the last one of the series, and for a lot of reasons, we don't have the technical capability for questions and answers. Now, I can still do it. I'm also tied to this mic rather than having a roaming mic, which is probably better because I kind of roam too much anyway. Can you see me okay? Is the lighting good? Okay, good. All right. Well, and let me just tell you what I want to talk about today. I'm going to go ahead and get into it and talk through this a little bit. Dan sends his greetings from SoCA. We almost canceled because of all the technical difficulties. I'm thinking of doing a shorter lecture now, if that's all right with you all. And you can go out and for coffee and talk about all the wonderful things you learned over the semester. So let me just tell you some of those things we learned. I just want to go through the schedule we went through. We talked about this semester. This is my, second year of doing this. It's also my last year. I'm going to get married. I can't stop talking about it. I'm sorry. And she's just, I was on the phone. We're 4 hours a day. She's in Italy right now. And she's been in Italy for the last 9 weeks. And we're talking, it's just phone bills. There's no phone bills. It's free. But still, it's crazy. Yeah. Anyway, so I just want to go through what we've covered so far this semester. We started with me. And we started with me because of a similar situation. Whenever I show up, my last name is Jenks. And whenever I show up, bad things happen. And so the first person we had scheduled was from Richard Nixon Library. And he, because he's a federal employee, decided not to come at the last second, didn't tell us. And so all of a sudden I had to walk in and do a lecture. And I was scheduled to do a March 15th lecture. And so I canceled that and just threw something together in January, which is what I'm going to be talking about again today. I'm going to give the second half of that message. I had something in my head I wanted to talk about, and because I didn't have time to prepare it then, I just gave what I could. And so I'm going to give part B today. All right? But I just want to show you what we've covered so far this year. We've covered neurorobotics. Remember that? That was a wonderful talk. A guy, UCI robotics, leader in robotics, showed what they're doing to help artificial intelligence with robotics. Is pretty interesting. We had Dr. Gaines come and talk about healthy cognitive aging. I know a lot of you really appreciated that. Got a lot of response from there. Hey, wow. I got light. Now I can't see any of you. You know how that happens. You're not there anymore, which is awesome for me. I'm scared to death of you, and it helps not to be able to see you. Dr. Lights came and did political activism in the U.S. military, and then we had Dr. Sam Ehrman from USC come and talk about, Puerto Rico, and talk about the Supreme Court and how it influences the world through history, and I thought it was a very interesting talk. The Marine Corps came and talked about Camp Pendleton and their role here in Orange County and in the world. We had Dr. Ruiz come and talked about Latino history, and that was fairly interesting. And then we had Dr. Morgan come and talk about human trafficking, something we need to know something about. Oh, we had a panel discussion this semester with Dr. Reverend Barkley talking with 5 panelists talking about religions. I thought that was a really interesting time for 2 reasons. One is they all disagreed, but we couldn't really tell. They didn't disagree. They didn't yell at each other. They just disagreed. And it was kind of nice to hear how a Hindu is different from a Muslim, is different from a Catholic or Christian versus, a Jew. We had all different religions. I thought it was pretty interesting. I like that a lot. 4 perspectives on the existence and nature of God. Then we heard Hugh Ross. Wow, wasn't that amazing? with all the visuals showing about how unusual our planet is for having advanced life forms on it, how improbable it is for that to even exist, to have all the carbon forms necessary to support life, water, and how difficult on a probability level it is that Earth could even exist. And you think of the billions and billions of planets and stars out there, but how, I mean, even with the billions, the odds of us existing is really, I love Dr. In fact, I've subscribed to his little, he gives a newsletter, and it's pretty, I never knew of the guy. Well, I knew of him, but I never heard him until then, and that was interesting. Then Ms. Barnett talking about etymology of language, how we use it. She was great, I really liked her. Dr. Snow, a couple weeks ago, talked about homelessness in Orange County, talking about how to solve the problem through, the solution is not just feeding people. It's if you provide homes for them, it saves money for the state, basically. And I think that, and it solves the problem on a root level. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I really liked last week, Steve Porter, Dr. Porter from Biola or Talbot Seminary, talking about not what is moral knowledge, but is there such a thing as moral knowledge? And if we don't allow for moral knowledge, what happens to our world? I thought that was very insightful. In fact, I was a little nervous. I was like, yeah, that is the question to ask, whether or not there is moral knowledge. And if we give up on that, which he's arguing strongly against that, wow, how our society falls apart. Just the idea there has to be this idea of good, better, best. I really enjoyed him. And now me. But before we get to me, I just need to say something. There she is again. Okay, and we're going to get married in Italy probably in late September, just to let you know that. And did I mention Angela again? Okay, I'm sorry. All right, so the topic I want to talk about, and I want to deal with... It's a struggle I've had for many years. I'm having now. I'm trying to work this out in a lecture. So even though in January it was unrefined, I'm still working these thoughts out because I don't know what the answers are completely. I've got some directional answers. I don't know how to formulate it, and I don't really know if my answers are accurate. So might have to help me out with this a little bit. But how to trust in a hostile world. Now I'm making an assumption. The question is, do we live in a hostile world? Now, some of you say, my life's going fine. You're all in retirement. If you've had your hostile world, it's your, but you are facing health issues, and you're facing maybe financial issues, and you face social issues. It's harder to make friends when all your friends are, I read a quotation here from Betty White. She said, people need, that's on my phone. It's worth going for. Just a second. She said, people ask me whether I should, let me get the quote. It's better at quoting her directly. Here it is. People say, but Betty, Facebook is a great way to connect with old friends. Well, at my age, if I want to connect with old friends, I need a Ouija board. And there's a sense, and my mom passed away a couple years ago. That's why I came to this area to take care of her in the last years of her life. And she commented many times, she's 95 and all her friends had gone, It's not that we make young friends is the answer to that question so that you can outlive them. But the idea is, life is harsh. Life is hard. And it's good. I'm not saying it's not good. And I'm not saying there's not easy, fun times. Did I mention getting married? Which is, getting to marriage is one thing. After you marry, I understand. You come talk to me afterwards about how marriage is hard or whatever. Thank you. Burst my little bubble. But the point is we live in a hostile world, and what I've discovered, and especially I think we all recognize this, is the political scene, the millennial scene, the culture is less and less trusting. We're more and more hostile. We're more and more threatened by people around us. We don't trust. We definitely don't trust our politicians. We don't trust the media. I don't care if you're right or left. You don't trust Fox, or you don't trust CNN, but almost you don't even trust your own media source, whatever side you're on. You know they're pushing their views. And you get a little data and facts behind it, but there's something truth behind that somehow, but you don't know if you're getting it straight. You know what I mean? There's always a spin. And we get the same spin, of course, in advertising. You expect, advertisers to spin their products to make them look better than they really are. You expect that. But I guess we hope that public servants, like politicians, would be, maybe that the media is not going to expose, if they're going to expose the way they do, people aren't listening to the media anymore because it's so polarized within the media. There's a problem there. So where do we go to trust? What are we going to trust? What's going to be our point of reference? So we go to the church, and I mentioned this last time. Do you trust the Pope? Do you trust your priest after the scandals that have been going on in the Catholic Church? I know there's a lot of you are Catholics, and I know you're scandalized. You're frustrated with your own church. But listen, I'm a Protestant. I'm frustrated with the Protestant church. There's not. How about the Jews? Are we all? Where are we going to not find scandal? It's a hostile world. And the traditional ways we usually go to find protection and safety and family and village and community, it's not that we don't have those things. All of you have something. But it's getting more and more difficult to put our weight into something. The divorce rate in Orange County is 73%. Yeah. 73%. You can't even trust the person you love the most. So what do we do? How do we trust in a hostile world? You may be doing fine today, but how life really is. There's good times and there's bad times. And in the good times, you need to be careful to make sure you're building you're not trusting in a bad way, because it could lead to a lot of disaster. So I want to talk about what I'm going to talk about. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the problem of suffering and evil in the world. So this is a topic that is the number one topic in philosophy. In religion, by the way, in theology. If you ask, I'm a philosopher, I do philosophy, I do theology, my PhD is in New Testament studies. So what I've studied the most, more than theology and more than philosophy, is texts. And so not just the biblical text majority, but I also texts related to the Bible or other religions now. I'm getting into the texts of other religions. But I like text. I like text for a lot of reasons. It helps me understand what Christianity is all about from its sources rather than the spins. Because who do you trust? I trust written words more than I trust Joel Osteen or Chuck Swindoll. I like Chuck Swindoll. I do. I'm not Rick Warren. I love Rick Warren. But Rick Warren would say, "Hey, don't listen to me. Read the text." He would say that, but so would Chuck Swindoll. In other words, there's these people that teach the text, but they really want you to know the text. So I said, okay, I want to know the text. That's what I did. So that's what my specialization is. And I'm spinning something here, too. I'm painting a story of theology, of philosophy, and that's what teachers do. But at the same time, here's a question. Should you trust me? You know why you should trust me? Because I'm a professor. And I've read a lot of books. And I'm really, really smart, my mom would tell you.
But you're still getting married.
I know. Hey, I'm getting married. Did I mention that yet? I'm 58 years old. 58, never too late. She's 53. Neither of us have ever married, no kids, nothing. We're clean slates, both of us. I've dated a few girls, but I've never married. Okay. Thank you for that humbling comment. So first I'm going to talk about the topic of suffering and evil. I'm going to discuss it a little bit in terms of karma and dogma. And we'll talk about it, and you'll see where I'm going with that in a second. I'm going to talk from a historical perspective to show why who we are. Okay, I didn't say that correctly. This is done too quickly. How we are enlightened in our suspicion, how we who are enlightened are suspicious of dogma and a personal God that requires anything of us. So one of our problems we have today, and some of you in this room are very religious, and some of you in this room are very non-religious. You're against religion. You're atheists. I've got atheists in this room. I teach a class on free thought, history of free thought in the Western world. Take it. It's not going to be offered. I'm getting married. Did I mention that? So I'm not teaching in the fall. There's a theme this morning. She comes Wednesday, and so it's just like, did I mention that? Okay. I'm sorry. My brain's gone. But I teach a class on history of free thought in the Western world for the Emeritus Institute, and it's a great class. And I have, it's largely filled with people that are non-religious of any sort, I'm talking that the point of that class, and kind of the point of this morning too, is to talk about why are we against religion? Just the idea of religion, not any specific religion, But why? People that are atheists, why are they atheists? Atheism is a belief system. And people, no, I know there's no God. Okay, well, good for you. You know everything then, because in order to know there's no God, you have to know everything, and so it's really hard the people that are dogmatic about atheism, in my mind, are just as bad as people are dogmatic about religion. They come on and say, I know this is true. Jesus rose from the dead. We get mad at people that are dogmatic about the religious views, and atheists can be as dogmatic as religious people about that. So so what's the key? To be non-committal, to be an agnostic? Well, that's also a belief system. That's also dogmatic. I'll never take a position. That's a dogmatic position, So we have a problem with how we face religion and how we face, and I'll tell you where the problem has come. It's coming. I'm going to explain it to you really quickly. I did this in I'm going to rehash a little bit of my January lecture, because I want you to see historically why you are, as an American, value separation of church and state, and why you value, who are religious value religion, why who are not religious, why we like our independence, freedom of religion. Then why enlightened thinking falls short of addressing our fundamental questions and does not give adequate guidance for trust in a hostile world. So what I want to show you is why enlightenment's selling us short. See, we're enlightenment people. We're that place in history. You can't go back before the Enlightenment. I'll show you how this works. We're enlightened people, and we are still not trusting. We're still dealing with a lot of problems, and the problems are getting worse, and we all know it. So what are we going to do? Okay. So finally, I'm going to consider what our alternatives are to pursue the good life, given an understanding of ourselves, our neighbors, the world, the universe around us. What and how can we trust or love, given the reality of suffering and evil? So let's just plunge right in and talk about the problem of evil. And I like breaking up the problem of evil into two sections. I break it into suffering and evil. My first comment is this, is that not all suffering is evil. I know, it says moral up there, but not all suffering is moral. And if it's not moral, it's also not evil. Not all suffering is moral. It goes beyond morality. We blame God for allowing or causing suffering. But how about like natural disasters or diseases? And here's some examples: earthquakes or tsunamis, cancers or blindness, famine or plagues. Now, what I'm going to get with this is this. Those questions, no one did anything wrong to cause an earthquake. Does that make sense? Now, by contrast, someone murdering somebody, that's an evil. Hitler in World War II, that's an evil. Do you see the difference? There's suffering that we go through that is not all on a moral plane. And so when people ask these questions is, why would God allow, how can I trust in a God who would allow evil? Sometimes the question people are really asking is, why am I hurting so much? If God, how can I believe that God loves me? There is a God and that he cares about us, and I'm hurting so much right now. My back is out. I'm just, whatever. It can be a very personal thing, or it can be a very much of a judgment call. I find a lot of people are angry at God for things like tsunamis. And, if you're here for Hugh Ross's thing, you realize, boy, there's big forces at work, and they're natural forces. We should, I can tell you something. There is going to be another flooding of Bangladesh. About every 10, 20 years, there's a big flooding, and masses of people get killed. So why do we keep reproducing and moving to the beaches of Bangladesh? We know it's going to happen again. Why are we living in Southern California? There's going to be an earthquake. No, what I'm saying is there's natural disasters. I lived in Texas. My gosh, why did anybody live in Texas? And it's so hot and humid, and or you go to, we know of tornadoes. Why do people live in areas? Well, why doesn't the tornado just skip around the city? If there was a God, He'd make the tornado skip around the city. He wouldn't let it go through a populated area. No, that's just not how nature works. And I think all of us understand that there are natural forces out there just built into the way the universe works. And you can say, well, I wish we lived in a world that was more sanitized, that didn't have natural disasters. So I just want to talk about that. We live in a cause-effect universe with a fixed law of entropy. What's entropy? Entropy is the degradation of the matter and energy of the universe to an ultimate state of an inert uniformity. There's a good definition. This comes out of Webster. The degradation of the matter and energy, in the universe to an ultimate state of inert uniformity, or in other words, a gradual decline into disorder. We're all going to die. And all mass and energy is moving towards neutrality. And that's just something that any scientist, you already know that's true. You're going into neutrality. That's all matter and energy is going that way. And that's just good science, but it's good physics. It's also something that's, some people would say that it's not a bad thing. Aging is not a bad thing. What if you had to be 20 years old your whole life and you never grew? You never got older, never got younger. If you imagine that kind of a world, some people would say that's a horrible world. They wouldn't want to live. Growth is important. And change is important, even if it's uncomfortable. And even if it leads to a maturing that leads ultimately to falling apart. And that's something that we could debate on a philosophical level. What is the ultimate good? Is that a good or a bad that we age? Would you want to go and be 14 right now and stay at 14? Now, what age would you choose? 40? What age would you choose? The fact that things fall apart might not be a bad thing. It's the creation of new, and modernization comes through things falling apart. We invent out of destruction. And it's just an interesting way we think about life. But one thing I want to dispel also on this moral issue of good and bad is that good and evil is a binary. This is the yin-yang symbol, the symbol of Asian religions. I'll say Hinduism, Buddhism, Tao. The Asian, and some of you are familiar with this, some of you don't know anything about this. And I'm going to give a very brief introduction to it. So if you're an expert in this area, trust me, I am not the expert. Although I have read up a lot about Buddhism, and I'm not a Buddhist. Just a full disclosure, I'm biased. I come from a Protestant Christian background, okay? So that's my approach to this whole thing. And so you go, I don't want to hear from a Protestant. Okay. And I'm not, but I don't think it's going to, well, it may. You tell me if it's good or bad. So what is karma? What's yin-yang? Those who hurt you will eventually screw themselves up, and if you are lucky, God will let you watch. No, that's a funny definition. What I really want to say, it's the sum of a person's actions in this and previous states of existence viewed as deciding their fate in future existences. So there's this idea in karma of a balance in the universe between good and evil, life force and death. And there's a balancing that happens in our existence. So what happens is karma, yin-yang, or good-evil balance, are behind it all. And if the world is hostile here, it's peaceful somewhere else. There's a balancing that goes on in the universe. male, female, violent, peaceful. It goes, there's, you have these opposite extremes. And with that is this idea that good and evil are powers, are forces, and they're equal forces. They're pushing against each other, but they're also equally balanced. That is not the view of the West. That's the view of the East in general, through their religious beliefs. The view in the West is dogma. And the dogmatic view is that God is behind it all, this omnipotent force, this creator. He created the world. One of the views of karma, which is pretty interesting to me, is the reincarnation view. And that is that matter and space go on in a continuum, and there's a life force, and you enter in, you're incarnate, you become flesh, your soul, the true you, becomes flesh. You die. In Buddhism, you die for 49 days or up to 2 years, and then you get reincarnated back in the life force. And you have this cycle. And you can come back as something else in Hinduism, right? A different animal. And your future state is determined based on how you lived in this state. And of course, the goal in Hinduism is nirvana, getting lost, being the drop in the ocean, getting lost completely in the water. We could talk a lot about westernized. See, my view of the Eastern views is going to be westernized. I think of it in terms of metaphor, which is not how my Hindu friends talk about it as much. They try and help me with the metaphors, just like I do with the Trinity, try and help them with the metaphors. But the idea is, with karma, matter and space go on from eternity past and eternity future. With a God idea, a creator God, there's eternity past, and then time and space start with the Big Bang, maybe, if you listen to Hugh Ross. And it's going to an end. Matter and time, space and time have an end as well. So if you read the Bible, for example, it starts with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It ends with, God creates a new, it wipes out this world, destroys it. You talk about global warming, climate change. This world's never meant to last forever. It has entropy built into it. It's going to neutrality. Glaciers will melt. And if you listen to Hugh Ross, once the Arctic sea melts, then all of a sudden we go into a new ice age, right? But the point behind the whole conversation is, we're living in a balance. But there is a God outside of space and time who's controlling everything, and he's good. This is the idea behind it. And evil isn't this counterforce to good. Evil is a result, evil is a result of freedom to not love that he gives humans. Evil is either the corruption of the good or the absence of good. In other words, you can distance yourself from the good. This is how it's pictured in the Bible and other philosophies. Or you can corrupt the good. So Satan is a good angel who's corrupted. He was created good, but becomes corrupt. He's not on par with God. He's not on the same level. So it's not good versus evil fighting a battle. It's God is good, and so it's a different way of conceiving evil, and it's a different way of approaching life. So the question is, in history, how has dogma and this idea of karma worked itself out? And that's what I've been thinking through in my head. And I'm also thinking of these two words as I go through this. I think of freedom. I want to have personal freedom. With consequences, without consequences. I want justice too. So when I hear in the news of some serial killer or I want justice. I want them to I don't want to just kill them. I want them to hurt. If you've had anybody close to you get hurt, I've had situations in my life where people have been very good friend, a victim of incest from her father at a very young age, under 5 years old. And I look at that and I think, that guy, not only does he need to be separated from her, but he needs to suffer. I mean, there's just, It's her life. I know her as an adult. She's messed up. And that's kind of crimes mess us up permanently, you know. They're true victims that are made out of this thing. So I look at this. Aren't you glad you came today? But I'm thinking, you know, I want freedom, but I also want justice. I want some kind of control on my world. So we have the choice of karma versus dogma. Karma is yin-yang, or good-evil balance, and dogma says evil is a corruption or the absence of good, and that good and evil are not equals. This is kind of a symbol I found on the internet for the Trinity. That'd be a picture of God, and I don't know if it's a good, accurate symbol, but it's good. So the question comes out: who is responsible for evil? And if we say it, this is all going to make sense in a second. Is God responsible for evil? Many people say, I can never believe in God because he allows evil. Some people come as much as to say that God is the cause of evil. So in other words, people say, I can never believe in a God that allows 6 million Jews to be killed. And I understand, listen, I grew up in that argument and in that thought. I'm so sympathetic with the Jewish cause, trust me on this one. So I'm not saying that is not a horrible, horrible tragedy. I'm talking about it in an abstract way, though, and I just want you to understand that on an emotional level, I'm trying to separate my emotions from the ethics of it. And what I'm saying, though, is that God was not on the side of Hitler. He was on the side of the Jews that were dying. The Christian view in this is very clear, that God always suffers with the marginalized and with those that are persecuted and the martyrs and those that die. He's never on the side of the oppressor. And we can talk about that. Well, what about the Old Testament? Even then, he does things he uses Israel to destroy oppressors as his tool. I mean, that's the answer to that question ultimately. But my point is that is God responsible for evil? I think we need to, if that's your position, you need to rethink that. We also see the problem of society. As evil exists in society, and we also see evil within ourselves. And we've got to think through all those things. You know, I think you're not as good as you want to be. You're striving, you want to be, but you're not there yet. You know, and I don't know what level you're at. Maybe you have deep scarring in your past of guilt and shame, but maybe you've lived a pretty good life and things are going great, and you don't know why God wouldn't like you. And whatever. Okay, so we have different levels of how much bad we see within us. And at this point, I'm going to go through a conversation that I had in January with you, and I'm going to talk about this issue of evil, hostility in our world. See, this is some leaps I'm taking. I hope you can track with me. I'm going to give you a quick review of what we did in January. And what I'm going to talk about is that there's two major events that happened in world history. And it's this question of karma versus dogma. It's the question of God or a balancing act between good and evil. And the first event is whether you like it or not. I don't say this because I'm a Christian. It is the most important event for Western humans, for Western humanity. And that's the Jesus event. It's not because you like it or believe in it, it's just because it had the biggest influence on you. And you don't even realize it, but it has on our way of thinking. Before Jesus, we had naturalists and philosophers and polytheists of the Greco-Romans, and they were asking questions without any idea they had no point of reference from which to make their observations outside of their five senses and their logic, their reasoning. And that's how they determine reality. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mentioned in the past, the philosophers had a way of interpreting matter, space, and time. They had a way of talking about death. They had a way of talking about morality, about beauty. And they just made observations about the world, and they're very good at it. And I like them. The Jews predated the Greco-Romans, and they had a totally different way of looking at this world. And they say that there was a God that revealed himself 1500 BC to Moses. Moses is out walking and being a shepherd out in the middle. There's a bush, a fiery bush burns, and he looks, it's a bush that's burning, it's not being consumed. He looks and he goes, what's that all about? And God speaks to him from the bush and says, take off your shoes. The place where you're standing is holy ground. He takes off his shoes, and God, he's never met God. But there he meets God. And the religion of the Jews is a religion of revelation. So we know about reality not just by our observation and not just by logic, but also by what the Creator God told Moses. And all the 40 other authors of the Bible. There's 40 authors in the Bible. And they all got revelation directly from God, inspired words. And it's amazing, people who believe in God and Jesus, or Judeo-Christians or Muslims, believe that God reveals himself to us through words. And we are made uniquely able to communicate think abstractly and communicate with words, and God uses words to communicate with us. So that's the Jewish contribution. But until the Jesus event, when Jesus happened, and Jesus, we can say a lot about it, it's that point in history where things happen. Christianity overtook the Western world. People believed a fantastic, when I say fantastic, I mean a fantasy type idea that someone could rise from the dead. It had never happened like that. It happened in mythology, but not in a sense of history where people really believed it actually happened. But you know what? It's so crazy. The majority of the world by 3rd century AD, and I'm talking intellectuals, politicians, bright people, as well as peasants, believed that Jesus rose from the dead and became Christians, so much so by the 4th century, to be a Roman citizen in a Holy Roman Empire, you had to declare yourself to be a Christian, that you believed in the Trinity, that Jesus was God and man and rose from the dead. That literally was the standard. And it lasted that way for 1,000 years. So that's the first event. The second event is Descartes. That's when that broke. That's what helped you become. And Descartes and Enlightenment is a reaction against the Jesus event. It's a new way of thinking. It's not against necessarily Descartes would call himself a Christian. But everybody was a Christian in the 1400s. Everybody's a Christian. You're saying, what do you mean everybody's a Christian? There's some Jews. There's some. Yes, there were. But what I'm saying is that the culture was moving ahead. The politicians, the press. It was dominated by Christianity. So I'm obviously, there's obviously particular stories. We could talk about individual. I'm talking in broad sweeps about what makes you the way you are. The Enlightenment happened as a reaction against that. That's why that's important. And it kind of gives you a choice today. Which way, how you want to think about life. How do you want to think about evil? How do you want to think about choices for your life? How are you going to trust in a hostile world? I think this is the critical core to figuring this out. So let me just talk about the Jesus event. It subverted Greek polytheism and Jewish monotheism. After just 4 centuries, it dominated popularly and culturally. It became the basis for Roman citizenship. It eventually became dogmatic and oppressive, leading to mass injustice. Let's talk about the word dogma for a second. In the 4th century, Constantine, the emperor, commissioned a council to get together in Nicaea, decide what is Christianity. Because up to that point, the church had been persecuted. It had been underground, and no one knew what Christianity was in a uniform sense. They got all the leaders of all these churches all over the Mediterranean. They brought them to Nicaea, and they said, what is Christianity? Let's beat this thing out. And they had the texts. That is not when, by the way, people ask me this question. The New Testament, the books of the New Testament, actually came much earlier than that. It took a while for them to get the full collection together. But Eutychus, it doesn't matter. The compilation of the New Testament happened in a time of persecution when the church was underground. But by Nicaea, they had the whole New Testament, and they validated it there. But they also said the Trinity was the big thing. You have to believe in God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And they made these creeds called the Nicene Creed, appropriately titled. And they made people, so to be a Christian, you had to say these. And what it was it's a baptismal formula. Baptism is the way of getting initiated into the church, and people would say the Nicene Creed as they get baptized. It was their confession that made them Christians, and everybody did it to become a Roman citizen. It was political as well as religious, something you're not used to because America has a separation of church and state, unlike many cultures today, or especially in the past. Up until 1984, Italy was a Catholic nation. You pay taxes to the Catholic Church if you're an Italian citizen. That's a very foreign idea to many of us. We don't realize that the church and state are often united. America is a unique experiment on this earth. So, everybody's a Christian. If they want to be a Roman citizen, at first everybody wants to be a Roman citizen. But then what happens is power corrupts. And over time, what happens is the church is very confused about what it is. And by the 1200s, it takes a while for it to really find its way through the corruption, but by the time it moves on to a place of real darkness. And that's when Descartes comes along with the Enlightenment. And Descartes is the father of the Enlightenment. He's also the father of modern philosophy. So not Plato and Socrates, but he's the father of Spinoza and Kierkegaard. Of Kant and of the modern philosophic movement of the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th centuries. It was a reaction to religious abuses. What happened is Catholicism, I say Catholicism, Christianity, had turned into an abusive system. It was unjust. It was corrupt. What happened with the Enlightenment is it was a time where it was ultimate cynicism. You talk about not trusting, it's a time of maximum not trusting. What can you trust was the question Descartes asked. He didn't ask what is true, which was the question before him. What is true is whatever God says is true, and theologians try to understand truth. Descartes asked a different question of what can I be certain? He's responsible for knowledge, wisdom, virtue, and justice. It shifts from God to the individual. So before this, it's God that knows everything, and we just need to trust God. God will take care of everything. And after Descartes, it's you. You become the center of your universe, not God. Okay? So this is a very important period. Let me just go through this. This is really quickly. Just as a way of summary. This is something I did in January. By the way, there are these. I don't think this is being videoed, but there's my video. You can go back and see this in January. The video I did of this. But there's Greco-Roman philosophy and Jewish monotheism. I just mentioned that merges with early Christianity. And what's important is not that Christianity is true or false. The important thing is that it just takes over. Polytheists give up their polytheism for monotheism. And Christianity is a Jewish movement. Now, granted, it's a sect, but by 70 AD, when the Jews are destroyed and scattered, what does remain is this church. That's a Jewish church, and eventually, of course, becomes international. That's part of the biblical story, is how the church allows non-Jews to become part of it. It was exclusively Jewish in its origin. Yeah, the Edict of Constantine, the Council of Nicaea, that's where Rome declares itself to be Christian. Then we enter the Middle Ages, 1,000 years, and there's not much done then, but there's not much need to be done. It's an agricultural society. People say it's Dark Ages, as if it just means there wasn't much being written. It was remarkable, but things were happening. By the end of the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, you have a faith system, and then you have someone like Saint Anselm with his Summa Theologiae talking about reason in faith, which is very important. It's going to have a big impact when we get to Descartes. There's more emphasis put on your mind, not just on revelation, just believing blindly, which is what dogmatism almost asks you to do. Dogmatism is can be a power struggle. We know how to get you into heaven. If you just believe, say these three things, you'll get you into heaven. And people react against that. Martin Luther did. You had the Reformation. Martin Luther was the first Catholic to stand up against the church and succeed. He got a popular movement behind him. There's other people that tried to do it before him and they got killed. They got martyred. John Huss, Anabaptists, they burn him at the stake. John Wycliffe translates the Bible into English, and he's an Oxford professor. He translates the Bible into Middle English from Latin Vulgate. He dies of a stroke. 50 years after he dies, they dig up his bones from the church graveyard because they want to make it very clear that he's excommunicated post-mortem. They burn his bones, throw the ashes into the river because they want to publicly declare that that guy is not going to go to heaven when he dies. See, what the church believes is that they're sending people to heaven or hell. They've got the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And what they say goes. So people are scared to stand up to the Catholic Church, but Martin Luther does. As a monk, he goes to Rome and is scandalized by the excesses of the church, using heaven and hell and purgatory as motivation to get people to give money to them. Indulgences. You paid for your loved ones to spend less time in purgatory. And he said, that's just not right. He saw the abuses of how they used the money. Vatican was being built at the time. He saw St. Peter's. He saw people weeping for their salvation. And he read Romans. He read the Bible, where it says very clearly in Romans that righteousness comes by faith, not by works. And he changed everything. He stood up against the church. He was willing to face the Catholic Church condemning him to hell. Then there came the Counter-Reformation, where the church reaffirmed its stance on works. We had the 30 Years' War, a religious war between Protestants and Catholics, one of the most bloody wars in all history. Europe is reduced from 21 million to 13 million in that war. Half of the German men die in that war. It's a huge tragedy. And it starts off because of religion. It doesn't end because of religion, just as what starts it. It ends because of politics between Spain and Austria. Then comes Descartes. So he's set up. There's been so much discouraging stuff happening in the church, especially in the 200, 300 years previous Descartes. It's time for a change. It's a hostile world. No one can trust the church anymore. No one can trust anything. Descartes says, I can't trust theologians. I can't trust the philosophers. I can't even trust my own senses. What can I trust? And he ends up with a famous saying, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. What he ends up saying is this: all I know is that there's someone here asking these questions. Who's asking these questions? That's me. I'm asking these questions. That question asker has to exist. I'm a thinker. The person asking this question has to exist. And he says, that's the only thing I know. I don't know anything else. That's where he concluded. And out of him came empiricism and rationalism, all kinds of philosophies. There's a major two divisions. Rationalism being mathematics, the idea that there's logical. He was a rationalist. And then there's empiricists like Bacon, who believe in the scientific method and believe in the senses. And we could talk about the history of philosophy at that point. But my point is, Descartes rocked the world. Because when he said that only thing I know is that I exist, when he questioned the theologians and the dogmaticians, the religious dogmatics of his predecessors, what he is saying is the authority for truth, the authority for my behavior lies inside me, not outside me. So let me just show you how this works. It's called subjectivity. We're sharing divine subjectivity. So before Descartes, we had a creator. He's the subject. He's the huge subject. He's all creation revolves around him, and he makes objects, the creation, the world, material world, you and me, humans, animals, everything. But then he makes man, and man is uniquely made in God's image, in his likeness, meaning the man can create and think. We're like God in some way. This is what the Bible says. So we're both able to create, we're both an object, but we're also creators. So we kind of share some of his qualities, but we're not on his level, okay? And, but with Descartes, there's a shift in authority for truth from God to man. We become subjective. We emphasize the fact that we're subjects, not just objects. We're not made to please God. We're not. We don't even know why we're made. We get lost a little bit because we understood to pleasing God, to glorify God, and that was an easy thing to do. We understood what our life purpose was when there was a God. When we get rid of God as the creator, then we don't know what we're really here for. We're looking for a motivation within ourselves. And the shift in authority for truth shifts from God to man. There's a shift in the center to the individual rational mind, or to the senses if you're an empiricist. And man takes on characteristics traditionally ascribed to God. And with it comes an assumption of the sovereignty and potential omniscience of our collective pursuit of knowledge. That is, we assume that eventually science will know and respond to all human problems. Our collective mind becomes the ultimate good. Our hope is in our collective mind. None of us knows enough, but we think that together, eventually, we're going to know enough. And by the way, that's the American dream. That's our hope. Critical in this whole process is the role of a discerner or a judge for morality. If the king or pope who represent God on earth is not the mediator of God's justice, who is? Who are you to tell me that what I do is wrong? Who am I to tell you that what you do is wrong? If there's no king, there's no pope telling me all this, does the individual decide? Do the masses, do we vote on elections and have the majority rule that? Do we have a federal government? How are we going to decide what's right, what's moral? It's the problems of a finite perspective. You know this when it comes to things like medicine. You go to a doctor when you get sick. Now, you may go on the internet and know more about, you think you may know more about your cancer than your doctor does, but really he does know more, and you know that. So you give yourself over to it. You have to trust him. Your mechanic, easier question is your car, your transmission goes, or you hear a lump on your car, you take it to the mechanic and have him fix it. You don't try and, you can get on YouTube and figure it out. But it's going to take you a lot longer and probably cost you a lot more money. Maybe you can't do it anyway because the mechanic's a little younger than you are and can nimble and can get it done. We trust in our authorities. But all of a sudden, if we are left without God, we're left without access to perspective. And we recognize the reality of responsibility and consequences when we just divorce ourselves from God, when we separate from God, when we say, I can't believe in God anymore. What happens is we cut ourselves off from ultimate consequence. Now, there may be consequences. We live in a cause-effect universe. We recognize that. But we recognize that all of a sudden we became responsible. There's no buffer. How many people go to God in order to say, oh, give me mercy, Lord, don't punish me, take away my consequences for my problem? How many go with your parent? Your kids go to their parents for the same thing. You know, I broke this glass, could you fix it? And you glue it back together again for your son or your daughter. My doll's broken. Can you fix it? And we see God as a fixer, and if he's not there anymore, then we have no one to fix our problems. We've got to figure it out for ourselves. All of a sudden, we grow up really quickly. Do we know enough to think and judge for ourselves? So let me just write this out really quick. What is modern dogma? We start with this idea of subjectivity, that we are the center of our world. We use our reason, our mind, and we use our experience. We use science, and we use mathematics, to use the academy for that, to develop our own personal biases, and those biases become our own dogma, a substitute dogma. It used to be that we believed in God and what the Bible said and what the theologians told us, and we believed in them, because they're good people, and they're trying to find, and there's a source outside of us that's really knows everything. He's the truth. He's bigger than me. I mean, God is everything. He's sovereign. He's huge. He's omnipresent. He's omniscient. So He's the point of reference. He's the one that knows everything. But now when I become the one knowing, I have to develop my own dogma. But to do that, we have to assume that we know a lot, that we're really wise, that we use our knowledge really well, and that we're basically good. The authority for our personal dogma rests in ourselves and our choices. So the question becomes, who is responsible for all this evil? When we bet in dogma, the responsibility for suffering evil shifts from God to us. You cannot blame God for World War II anymore. You got to blame Hitler, Stalin, Trump, yourself. We're not just free to choose. We're forced to choose. And the choices are not just between religious faith and independence. There's many viable forms of authority, from religious faith and non-religious philosophies. And the biggest question we have is, and this is the trust issue, how do you trust in a hostile world? How do I live independently and freely as a human being, but also with a sense of justice, with a sense of right and wrong? It's not, maybe I can control myself. Honestly, to be honest with you, I can't control myself, and I know this about myself. I've done things that are wrong when I haven't wanted to, like looking back, I go, why did I do that? Have you had any of those kind of situations? Oh, why did I do that? And at the time, even before I did it, I knew not to do it, and I did it anyway. And I'm not talking as a 4-year-old. As a 40-year-old. I did stupid things. Knowing in advance it was stupid, knowing in advance, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know if I can trust myself. How can I trust you? Well, maybe, I had this perception that maybe I was worse than everybody else in the world. And I think maybe I am. But at the same time, I think we all might have that kind of sense like, I can't really trust myself completely. So again, let me just say what it requires. When we become the subject instead of God, it requires knowledge. Do we have enough knowledge to make good decisions? Wisdom. Even if we know enough, are we wise enough to govern with the data that we have? And I mean govern ourselves, our families, our culture, our world. The last question is justice. If we know enough and are insightful enough, are we virtuous enough to choose for the greater good? And what I've come to realize is sometimes I'm not. A lot of times I am. Maybe 80% of the time I'm okay. I do text when I drive sometimes. I caught myself coming over here doing that. What am I? Oh, I'm texting. And I didn't even know I was doing it. You go, oh, that's awful. You might have killed somebody. I understand. That's the problem. I do understand the consequences of my wrong behavior, and I do it anyway. That's the problem. I'm not virtuous enough, am I? So one way I'd like to look at that is this. We have the choice of dogma, a world of dogma, and I like to see it in terms of progression. A child. What's unique about children? Well, they're dependent. They're dependent on their parents. They're dependent on parents for provision, for protection, for wisdom, for guidance, for everything. When we live in a dogmatic world, as much as we might hate the corruption of the church, people chose that over not having that. And the reason is it's, there's many people live in abusive situations. I know many women who have had abusive families and marry abusive husbands. They walk right back into it because it's a thing that it's predictable, it's safe, they know what to do with it. I don't understand all the reasons why. I've done a lot of rescue type work in my past. And it's a little disturbing that someone who's been hurt so badly walks in and even doesn't want to get into a healthy situation. They choose the disturbing situation over a healthy situation. Children are dependent. Who and how does a child trust? Well, a child trusts any authority that tells them what to do. It can be a neighbor, it can be any adult. That's the problem. Don't trust strangers because strangers might not be trustworthy. You can trust Aunt Milda and you can trust, Grandpa. You can trust me, but don't trust Uncle John, first of all. And then don't trust, there's even people that are in our family we can't, because we know our children are so gullible. They're going to trust everything. That's a dogmatic view to me. Tell me what I'm supposed to believe and I'll believe it. The next one is the idea of free thought, or maybe karma. And that is the independence of adolescence. You know, when you turn 14, 15, your parents suddenly don't know anything about life. You want them to feed you. You want them to take you to Disneyland. But you definitely don't want them to tell you what to do when you're at Disneyland. And you can date whoever you damn well please. And thank you very much, Mom. I'm going to go on. And by the time you're 70, 18, you want to move out because your parents clearly are out of touch. Who do adolescents trust? And how do they trust them? See, we're going from a development, and my next question then is, where are we going from here? And I think the point is that we're becoming adults. We have to get to a place, what's the difference between an adolescent and an adult? Do we go from dependence to independence to what? Interdependence. Where we trust each other, where we live in a trusting world. So the question is, who do we trust? Well, do we trust what? The church? We're going to trust the state? We're going to trust the university? You're going to trust me? You're going to trust the world of commerce, your ads? You're going to trust the press? Are you going to trust the internet? Are you going to trust your neighbors? Are you going to trust your family? And there's a real wrestling that we go through in this process. Who can we trust? And you make decisions all the time about this. And not everybody's untrustworthy. You know, I hope I'm saying things that have some measure of help for you all. Your professors do that. Your rabbis and your priests and your imams do that. They try and give you counsel. Sometimes they're manipulative. You've got to be careful. Politicians, the press, tries to manipulate the way you think. Not so long ago, this is a quotation from a book by Flav. I'll show you, it's a great quotation. All our choices good. Not so long ago, we considered the founders of religion and great philosophers who thought deeply about the question of life worth living as medical doctors and nutritionists of our humanity. We expected them to tell us what human wholeness is and what's good for achieving it and why. And if we disagreed, we argued back, telling them where and why they were wrong. So it's okay for them not to be right, but they're authorities in our lives. Now we relate to them, theologians and philosophers, as we do to waiters in a restaurant, whom we count on to describe each dish, but not to tell us what would be good for us to order, let alone what true health is and how that meal we are about to order relates to it. In fact, we half expect them to praise any choice we make. For every choice is by definition good as long as we like the dish. No religious figure, no philosopher, no scientist can know what kind of life is good, certainly not good for us. We alone are the true experts of how our talents and yearnings conjoin to give birth to our dreams, which legitimize our striving. There's a quotation just basically lamenting the fact that we as individuals, without a dogmatic universe, we take opinions from people, but we really want people to praise us for our greatness, the greatness of our lives. So we look for economic capital, for social capital, for cultural capital, for symbolic capital, for body capital. We want to be rich. We want to be emotionally intelligent. We want to be educated. We want to be well connected. We want to be good looking. We want all these things. And we tell our kids, our grandkids, oh, you got to go to college. You got to get rich. You got to get good education. You got to get connected, get your networking together. Oh boy, you're so good looking. We try and help everybody get those things, but what are those things? Are those the ends of our life? Or are they only the means to something else? So a lot of people get very rich and they're good looking and they're intelligent and they're connected and they're still empty. So we look like this guy here next to two babes. Did I mention I'm getting married? Yet in work with all its achievements, and in leisure with all its pleasures, we languish. So we go for achievements and we go for pleasures. Those are the two ways we go in life, with all our accomplishments, with all our money, with all our beauty, with all our talent, with all our networking. We try and get high achievers, and we try and have lots of pleasure. But then we're left with this empty end at the end of it. We're wondering, and we're fixed on our iPhones when we have relationships right around us. We don't even know that we're missing out on things. The means have become the ends. In a way, we moderns resemble a painter who is forever concerned about improving his materials, the colors and brushes, the air conditioning, the lighting, the canvas, and the easel. But we never really started to paint. So I'm going to take a small dip here. It's hard for me to formulate this argument. I'm trying to think of the answer to this. I got this far. And what I know is philosophy. I know the way the philosophy asks questions. It asks questions about metaphysics and epistemology. That means, how do we know things? It asks questions about values. Like last week, the guy was a value ethicist. He talks about moral knowledge. That's a philosophical question. What is moral? We have logic and science and math, and we have philosophy of religion. And my question in this whole thing is there something in there about love? Because in my gut, what I realize that makes me whole, what ultimately makes me trust in this hostile world, what motivates me to get up every morning, get out there and do it again, is something that philosophers talk about. I think the meaning of life is going to come down to this. And maybe you'll disagree with me. Maybe in a question and answer, after I get done here in a couple minutes, you can give me your opinions on this. But this is the direction my heart's going. So look at me. I'm not an expert. I'm just bringing the problem to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Someone mentioned the Ten Commandments last time. I said, well, the Ten Commandments are kind of a means to an end as well for me. So what I mean by that is not just tolerance, especially if people are needlessly hurting others. There's a spectrum of trust from the individual to the collective to the God. But we fear authority. We don't know which tribe to be part of. So we isolate. And the question is, what is love? And this is how the philosophers talk about it. They talk in terms of sexual love, brotherly love, or friendship love. They talk in terms of self-denial. And what I want to talk about is agape love in this whole thing. Now, you might have heard of agape in terms of church. But agape as a church word is not really how the philosophers said it. It predates church, okay? But agape love is a special kind of love that I think is pretty important. So we go through these processes. Onto the second line, in order to live in community and relational intimacy, we must give up freedoms and appeal to higher justice. True love is both objective and volitional, as well as subjective and emotional. And in humility, love must precede our individual or collective pursuit of knowledge and truth. I mentioned a joke. You don't get out of bed in the morning, turn over to your spouse and say, honey, I just tolerate you so much. I'm just looking forward to the rest of our lives just coexisting together. That is just, when I even say that to you, you go, you laugh because it's not true. That's not the highest good. That's entropy. That's neutrality. That's trying to whittle everything down to we want to live. And we want to love. How do we do that? What is love all about? What is agape all about? And let's take the last couple lines. If we pursue a submissive state of love, the paradox is that our individual identity will be affirmed as a byproduct. If we really found what love is, self-sacrifice for a higher good is how the Greeks defined love. It's not Jesus. Jesus defined it that way too. Okay, and he actually modeled it in my mind. I'm a Christian. I come from that background. I think his death was sacrificial. He sacrificed himself for the good of others, for the good of all humanity. If you're a true Christian, you believe he died for the whole world, for everybody in the world. Love equals self-sacrifice, but it's a model for us at least of self-sacrifice for another's higher good. There's something about this that's ringing true to me. I'm trying to figure it all out. The question of truth, authority, and love. Is there moral knowledge and absolutes? That's a question that Dr. Porter asked last week. But then I think of this thing. Where does revelation come into it? I think if you don't accept revelation or dogma or someone else telling you what to think, you're left with just reason, you may never choose love. And that is my final dilemma. I don't know. I don't want to be a total fool, dogmatic person who turns completely on, just does whatever the Pope tells me to do. Now, some of you may say, I do, and I get it if you're a strong Catholic. I'm not trying to be anti-Pope. But what I'm saying is I want to be independent. I want to be I'm an American. Man. I want to be individual. I want to be free. I want to have freedom. I think God created me with a free mind. And he wants me to think and have emotions. And even he gives me the capacity and the freedom to do wrong, to hurt people, to quote unquote sin, to make victims and to be victimized. I don't want to do away with that completely. How much am I willing to give up to this dogma? Or, see, I'm a Bible guy. I've got my PhD in New Testament. I read it all the time. I think about it all the time. How am I going to do my life well? How can I live in truth? And how can I live in love? And I'm asking the question. I look at the karma guys, the Asian people, and I live in that world. There's something about that that's still a vacuum for me. We talk about, if you in anything with religion, that like the Muslims have lots of different groups, and Christians have you have Catholics and Protestants, and the Protestants have 240 different Baptist denominations in America. I think, wow, they're not united. There's something about this where, though, that I'm saying there has to be something there that I have to go for. I have to go for revelation, not just my own ability to think things through or trust. I trust my mechanic and doctors, but I think I need to trust something bigger than that. And maybe that's something we'll call God. That's my choice in general. But how do I help everybody else through that too? I want you all to be loving and truthful people too. I'm going to stop there. And I'd like to have some opportunity for dialogue. We're cutting off done a little early this morning. It's 10 till 11. But if we want to take a few minutes, I don't have any mics to give you. But if you have anybody have a question they want to ask? Yeah, go ahead, right down here. Just speak loud and I'll mention your question again.
It's not a question, but I want to comment on the fact that I personally, as a non-believer, I appreciated your open-mindedness approach to this whole subject you presented today.
Thank you.
Because you touched on so many things that I would believe as a non-believer.
Good.
I also want to say that I think that there should be freedom of religion, but also freedom from religion.
Right.
And I think that evil is coming from man and nowhere else.
Evil comes from man and nowhere else. Yeah.
Man is the source of evil. If somebody does something evil, it is what that person does, either individually or in a greater degree collectively, which comes to wars
Okay.
and such things.
I love your loud voice. I just make sure everybody's hearing what you're saying, and I've got a mic up here, so I'm going to try and relay what you're saying. She basically said a lot of nice things about how open-minded I am in my presentation. She's a non-believer, right? And at the same time, she believes that all evil comes from man, and humans are responsible for all evil. How do you go about trusting in your world? I mean, how do you go about, on a big level with politicians, don't you get your anxious about it? Are you at peace with yourself about that?
I don't know whether you can trust other people. You have to come to your own conclusions. The most important thing is to believe in yourself.
Okay, believe in yourself. You can't trust others necessarily. You need to believe in yourself.
For yourself.
Okay. I'm sorry we don't have mics, so I got to do this, but humor me.
Nobody else is responsible for me. I'm responsible for myself.
I'm responsible for myself. I really appreciate that feedback. Anybody else have any feedback you want to give? Or yeah, go ahead, right here. Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm just thinking out loud. Nowhere in the talk did you use the word society. I think we want to create a society in which people can thrive.
Yeah. I'll
I think that there are truths that have come down to us that have worked. I think that
Yeah, the comments made that society is maybe the direction we need to head in order to work on trust. And the problem is, in society, we have radical Muslims that will kill me. It takes, I can go to a bar in Thousand Oaks and someone might shoot me because they're having a problem with their day and they're going to, in other words, society, that's what our problem, I think in Laguna Woods Village with gated community and we're all here, we can kind of say there's a lot of safety here, but maybe there's a lot of, this room, there's probably a lot of people that share a lot of ideas and you have good friends here. You could make friends if you tried. And so, okay, someone almost fell. So the issue is one of society is a great point. I don't know what society is. I know there's family, and I don't trust my own family. That's one of my problems. I come from a family that's one of those families where it's so dysfunctional. I don't know where in that I can find but you didn't. I know you didn't. I know you. It's one of these things where, but it's a struggle for me to know who in society I can trust. So society is such a big word. It includes press, it includes university. Yes, in the back. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you repeat that?
What did you say?
Marriage! No, she just said thank you, and thank you for saying that. It's been my pleasure. You know what we're going to do? We're going to stop right now. If you want to talk about this is my favorite thing to talk about. We can talk about online, offline, email me, whatever. I'm thinking about this stuff all the time. It's been a great year for me, too. I'm sorry to end it with kind of a little bit of a weird time today, but I'm so glad you guys came out, and we'll see you next year. I may not be here next, this is my last year of doing this, but I hope to see you around. I'll be teaching probably in January again, after I get married. Marriage comes before you all. I'm so sorry. Good to see you all. Thank you again. Well.